My name is Lee Moore. I'm an adjunct professor at the University of Oregon in the United States, teaching Chinese and Taiwanese literature and film. I also work as a journalist, writing occasionally for papers such as The Economist. I'm currently finishing a book geared towards a general audience rather than a scholarly audience. The title of that book is China's Backstory, the Literature and History Behind Today's Front Page China News. And finally, I'm the host of the Chinese Literature Podcast. I apologize for not being able to be in person in Vienna today. I had some childcare issues come up. I want to thank Professor Radenick and my other colleagues at the GMM for being so willing to accommodate me and allow me to present via this video. Okay, I want to turn to my project. My project looks at the way that memory of the comfort women, those women who were trafficked as a part of the Japanese Empire, how that issue has played out both in Taiwanese society more broadly, but also in terms of a particular Taiwanese museum. The site that I selected to work on is called the Ama Museum. It's Taiwan's only museum dedicated to remembering these women who were trafficked by the Japanese during World War II. The world, along with my project, has changed quite a bit since I began this journey with my colleagues in Vienna. I interviewed to be one of the researchers as a part of the GMM in February 2020. I was given the honor to become an associate researcher with the GMM just as the world seemed to be ending. The project that I have been working on with the good folks at the GMM has focused on the Ama Museum in Taiwan, and I've already presented on this project with my colleagues twice. However, strangely, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, I was not able to travel to Taiwan and visit the museum itself until May of 2023. So this presentation is actually the first time that I'm able to do justice to this discussion. The issue of reckoning with the historical legacy of women trafficked by the Japanese imperial state during World War II is complicated throughout Asia, but it's hard to find a place where the issue is more complicated than Taiwan. In my presentation, I'm going to articulate what makes the comfort women issue unique in Taiwan. My argument is this: the comfort women issue had a different political resonance when compared with China or Korea or other parts of Asia, other than Japan. In fact, the divisions in Taiwanese society over how to remember these trafficked women, and even whether or not to remember these trafficked women, it resembles the highly politicized memory of these women in Japan. But the differing memories of these trafficked women is perhaps even more clearly connected to Taiwanese politics. The bifurcation of the memory of these comfort women is closely linked to the two different political groupings that dominate Taiwan. As a brief detour into Taiwanese history, the KMT ruled Taiwan as a single-party state until the 1980s, when democracy was allowed to blossom. During the dictatorship, any discussion of Taiwan as a distinct entity separate from China was violently suppressed. At this point, two party groupings developed, the Blue Party Bloc and the Green Party Bloc. These two party groupings are differentiated on one single point: what relationship should Taiwan have to China? As Professor Kirk Denton, in his recent book on Taiwanese museums, Landscapes of Historical Memory, has noted, since democratization in Taiwan, political parties play an important role in the museums of Taiwan. The Blue Party Bloc is made up of several remnants of the old KMT, along with a handful of other parties. The Blue Party members see Taiwan as a part of China. The main goal of politics for those in these Blue Party groupings defending this idea that Taiwan should be unified with China. As a part of this ideology, the Blue Party Bloc tends to despise Japan for its role in fighting the KMT during World War II. Let's turn to the second party bloc. The Green Party bloc is made up of different groups, the DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party, being the main party in this group. The Green Party bloc is made up of groups who all agree that Taiwan should be independent of China. The Green Party blocs tend to despise the KMT and China. They regard China and Taiwan as separate entities. When they view the history of Taiwan, they tend to view the Japanese period relatively positively, despite the fact that it was a colonial period where Taiwan was colonized by Japan. Which brings us to a different issue, the issue of comfort women in Taiwan. There was this general belief that Taiwanese women had not been victims of the comfort women system. This belief held for a long time in the post-war period. But in February of 1992, Japanese Diet member Ito Hideki discovered 3 telegrams from the Japanese military requesting the dispatch of Taiwanese comfort women, proving that Taiwan had been a victim of the comfort women system, that Taiwanese women had been victimized by this system. In 1992, the KMT-led government, which is fighting a rearguard action against democratization, the KMT is in charge at this point, and it's slowly bringing democracy into Taiwan. KMT State worked with an NGO, the Taipei Women's Rescue Fund, and set up a hotline to identify the women who had been trafficked by the Japanese Empire. The KMT-led state also passed legislation providing compensation to women who did not feel like the Japanese legislature's compensation was sufficient. The Taipei Women's Rescue Fund is identified. It identifies 48 women still living at the time in the 1990s who were trafficked. They were recruited between 1938 and 1945. Overall estimates range between 1,200 and 2,000 women being trafficked. Just as Taiwan is democratizing, this issue was thrust into Taiwanese politics. What is the result? Many people who identified with the blue political bloc, those who tended to identify with China and who saw the KMT as the victim of Japanese imperial aggression, they felt strongly that these 2,000 women had been victims of Japanese imperialism, or to say this in a different way, they projected their own understanding of their Chinese identity, victimized by Japanese imperialism, onto these women. On the other side, as the comfort women issue spreads throughout Taiwanese politics, those who are in the Green Party blocs tended to discount the experience of these comfort women as either false, they said that these women were lying, or they downplayed the importance of this issue in history. So discussions of the comfort women issue in the 1990s was something that was promoted by the KMT-led government, which at the time still ruled Taiwan. The first Green Party, pro-green, green-leaning government did not take power until the year 2000. Thus, many in Taiwan society interpreted the comfort women issue as a highly politicized issue that should be understood through one's own political identity and through the lens of how one understands Japan's role in Taiwanese history. That is, if a person identifies with the blue camp, one was to feel sorrow for the comfort women and to understand the comfort women as sharing something of their own identity, that of being victims of Japanese colonialism. But if a person identifies with the green camp, if a person tends towards a pro-Taiwanese identity, the expectation came to be that one was to ignore or discount these testimonies raised by the comfort women. As one activist working in the Taipei Women's Rescue Fund stated, quote, "The problem is Taiwanese society is not that interested in the past, probably because under the KMT rule we've been brainwashed too much. Any talk about World War II immediately raises suspicions that it's pan-blue KMT propaganda." So this all occurs in the 1990s as Taiwan is democratizing and as its population was shifting from a China-oriented identity imposed by the KMT under its dictatorship towards an identity that's embraced Taiwan and Taiwanese-ness as the main identity vector. Indeed, the shift from a China-oriented identity to a Taiwan-oriented identity has been the main thread in Taiwanese politics over the last 3 decades. This meant that many people in Taiwan simply decided to discount the travails of these comfort women, their testimonies. Those in the Green Party bloc began to deny that anything wrong had happened in Taiwan, most famously the rightist manga author Kobayashi, who published a manga called On Taiwan. He argued that the Japanese government did not traffic in women. In February 2001, interviews that Kobayashi had done with Xu Wenlong, a business magnate and advisor to green-leaning DPP President Chen Shui-bian. This interview is released as a part of the Chinese language edition of Kobayashi's book. It caused a major controversy. Xu Wenlong was forced to resign as an advisor to Chen Shui-bian, though Xu maintained his stance that these women were not trafficked. This incident is indicative of how the Green Party bloc has treated the issue. I appreciate y'all for sticking with me and wading deep into Taiwanese politics before we turn to the real issue here, the Ama Museum. The only museum in Taiwan dedicated to describing the difficulties these women went through as they were trafficked. The Ama Museum, the official name is the Ama Peace and Women's Human Rights Museum. It was opened in 2016. Ama is the Taiwanese word that means colloquially mother or female servant. It's the word that has come to be used in Taiwan to describe these women. The museum opening ceremony was attended by the controversial KMT president Ma Ying-jeou. Again, this underlines the politicized nature of the museum in Taiwan. The Taipei Women's Rescue Fund, which I mentioned earlier, that group organized the museum. The Taipei Women's Rescue Fund has been very mindful of the politics of the issue in Taiwan, and when it could, it sought to avoid these politics, though it was never really possible. The museum is supported by some government subsidies, but still there was not sufficient public interest. In 2019 alone, the museum incurred a cost of $4 million new Taiwanese dollars, approximately 134,000 US dollars. They had to close the museum in 2020 and move into a cheaper space. They reopened in November of 2021. In other words, the museum has, like the larger Comfort Women issue, not drawn as much public interest as it has in the PRC or in the Koreas. When I visited the museum in May of 2023, I was surprised to find what kind of state this museum was in. The museum is open to the public, but it's so difficult to find that it almost seems like the museum is hiding. These are some images that I have of the museum. You can see how difficult it is to find. When I, a researcher knowing quite a bit about the museum, tried to find the museum, I personally struggled to actually find the site. The museum is located on the 5th floor of a nondescript office building north of central Taipei. Outside the building, there is no sign that the museum even exists inside. If one does not know the exact address, there's no way to find this museum. And I did have the exact address, and I walked past the museum several times in the space of 10 minutes trying to find the museum. It's almost as if the museum is intentionally hidden. The museum is located, like I said, on the 5th floor of this nondescript office building. At the entrance to the building where you have to enter, there's a series of nameplates showing different businesses operating on each floor of the building. Therefore, the Ama Museum, it doesn't actually say Ama Museum. What is listed in Chinese is just Taipei Women's Rescue Fund, along with a dash in the word Ama. But there is no sign that this is a museum. The official name, Ama Peace and Women's Rights Museum, does not appear anywhere on the exterior of the building or even when you enter. Nothing indicates that there is a museum upstairs. This is squeezed right in between an office store and a furniture store. So this is just to say, it's almost as if there's an effort to hide this museum. What is surprising is that inside there is the small and excellent museum that offers a fully throated defense of these women and does a great job of trying to portray the suffering that these women went through. This museum has several exhibits on women who were trafficked. The exhibits inside give voice to these women, telling their stories. Sometimes these women's stories are printed out on signage inside the museum, but other times the exhibit quite literally gives voice to these women with audio recordings that museum goers can listen to as the women through recordings tell their own story with their own voices. You have these PVC pipes that have recordings of the Ama women's voices coming out of them. The exhibit design is thoughtful and thought-provoking. Much of the signage inside the museum is hung on wire mesh, reminiscent of some sort of prison. And some of the testimonies of these women are actually hidden behind these wires, as if, metaphorically, these women's words are being shown in some sort of imprisoned state. The exhibits themselves show, not surprisingly, a very anti-Japanese perspective. They clearly attach blame to the Japanese side, but in Taiwanese context, that is controversial. This confirms what those in both the blue and green political camps suggest with their behavior, that even in giving voice to these women, these exhibits are as much focused on faulting Japan. Here's one example of a typical exhibit. The signage here reads, quoting the victim's own words, "My wound, I will perhaps forget it on the day that I die. This is not something that I did myself. It was the Japanese people who did it to me." End quote. Down below, there is an extension of the signage that tells the visitors that the father of this particular trafficked woman incorrectly thought that she was working as a cleaner and that she kept her trafficking a secret, often waking at night crying. Her husband thought wrongfully that she was having nightmares. There was no one who knew her misery. So the museum does a great job giving voice to these women, but it also tends to show or reproduce parts of Taiwanese society that sometimes seem a bit dated. This image is a good example. This image shows what the ama did as young women before they were trafficked. You can see the breakdown in occupations that these women have. You can see women are shown in these occupations in a fairly gendered means of representation. You have three occupations of women. In the red dress, you have, quote, special occupations, women working in bars and hotels and restaurants, tea rooms or coffee shops. In the white dress, you can see this very sexualized rendering of a nurse. And in the black and white dress, you can see women in a French maid's outfit. This represents those women who were working as servants before they were trafficked. All of these women are wearing high heels, and all of them show a fairly sexualized form of these feminized occupations. Women working in bars and tea houses shown with a split skirt that goes very high on the thigh. The French maid outfit is even stranger. It's strange because I don't believe women in Taiwan in 1940s Taiwan ever wore any outfit like that. I've tried to figure out why these women in this image are so sexualized. This museum, the Ama Museum, is named Ama Peace and Women's Human Rights Museum. It seems strange to sexualize these women after they have been sexualized so much by the Japanese Empire. I was never able to figure out why they chose this form of representation. My best guess is just that this is and this is just well-informed speculation, this museum tends to play up the gendered identity of these women as a part of the women's human rights aspect of this museum, which involves highlighting their genders in this exhibit. But it seems like, it struck me as a very strange way to do it. All of this is to say, in these exhibitions on how women were sexualized by the Japanese Empire, the exhibits themselves highlight the women's sexuality in a manner that strikes me as inappropriate. This has been a fairly brief exploration of the Ama Museum. I have a very limited amount of time. It's a topic that definitely deserves more. To briefly restate the main points that I've wanted to make is the museum is highly politicized. Those in the blue political bloc tend to see women as symbols of China's own interaction with Japanese colonialism. They interpret women as signifiers of how China was mistreated. Those in the green political bloc tend to see this period of Taiwan's history as not a problem, and because of this, they ignore the fate of these trafficked women. The museum itself does a great job of exploring the lives and pains of these women, giving voice to these women, but the museum itself seems designed to be hidden. The museum does not advertise itself at all, to the point where this seems intentional. I'm going to leave it here. Thank you so much for listening to me and being willing to let me present by a video.